بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم فلقد نوينا جميعا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد صلاة نكون بها محبوبين لك ومحبوبين له وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد صلاة نكون بها محبوبين لك ومحبوبين له وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد صلاة نكون بها محبوبين لك ومحبوبين له وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم نور لنا البصائر وصفي لنا السرائر ووسع لنا المشاهد وصفي لنا الموارد. الحمد لله. So today's session is part 2 of these sessions, these exchanges. And the title that's been given, at least the title that I assumed it was, is The Map Within. Now, I don't want to spend too long recapping the previous session, which was on Monday. But I think it's important just for the sake of contextualizing where we're at. So we talked about the centrality of the science, the art, the discipline of ihsan, or of tazkiyah, or of tarbiyah to the Islamic tradition. That the Prophet ﷺ came, and the book that was revealed to his heart, ﷺ, the Quran, proceeds وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and he purifies them prior to, and he teaches them the book. This understanding that you're only going to truly understand and apprehend the deeper meanings of the Quran. لَا يَمَسَّهَا إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ, none of them touch it except those who are purified. Now the outward meaning of this ayah, or this verse, is that, as we know in the fiqh, which is known as fiqh al-zahir, the outward, that which is tangible, that which you can, understand through one of the 6 senses, is that it's impermissible to touch the Quran if a person is not in a state of wudu, if a person hasn't made wudu. They've done something to necessitate that. One of the things that necessitate making wudu. Through reverence and the sanctity of the Quran, you can't touch the Quran. لَا يَمَسَّهَا إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ, none of them touch it except those who are purified. But one of the deeper meanings, what's affirming the outer meaning of this, is that none are able to truly touch it, to embrace it, to access the realities of the Quran, except those that are purified of foul traits, purified of those things which ultimately avails from apprehending the reality of that divine communication from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we talked about something that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself alluded to. And there are many, many ahadith, as we mentioned. This is million induction. One of them is that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that indeed in the body is a lump of flesh. Mudgha. It's a very unappealing word in the Arabic language, and it sounds that way in English. It's like a clump of flesh. And the balagha, the rhetoric, is there to do that, meaning it's seemingly insignificant. It's seemingly meaningless. It's seemingly just functional. It's just part of your being as this kind of biological organism. Indeed, in the body is a lump of flesh, mudgha. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, إِذَا صَلُحَتْ صَلُحَ جِسْمُ كُلُّهُ. If it's rectified, if it's cultivated, if it's refined, if it's engaged with and apprehended and understood, and there's a process, there's a methodology to unlock the potential within that seemingly meaningless lump of flesh, صَلُحَ جِسْمُ كُلُّهُ, the entire body becomes rectified. وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجِسْمُ كُلُّهُ. And if it becomes fasid, which means corrupt or putrid or foul, it hasn't undergone that detox process, then it has this reverberatory effect that it spills out, bleeds into the entire body. Now what we're not, ala wahiya al-qalb, is it not the heart? And this is a form of Arabic rhetoric, saying like, this is the heart, this is what we're talking about when we mean the heart. So we're going to be exploring something about this today, and the reason why we're talking about maps, maps are really interesting things. I know somebody that actually collects old maps, and there are some, because what they do, it's not just writing down what you know of a particular geographical space, but maps traditionally, some of them were ancient, some of the first maps were Babylonian, but they're very different to what we see now as a globe today. A lot of it was actually more symbolic. So people would use maps to represent, which is another interesting word in the English language, a world view, which means a perspective on things. Like, what's your world view? It literally means the way you view the world, because the way you view it is going to have an impact on the way that you understand it and the way that what you take from it, and so on and so forth. So, as we know, the science of map making is called cartography. And the cartographer is the map maker, which we now have Google to take the reins for. But what's interesting is in a digital age, we have digital maps. They're even looking at the revolutionary impact of 3D maps, which are kind of frightening because they're almost, becomes intrusive, becomes something that you're actually being spied upon. It's more of a surveillance project than actually expanding one's horizons and understanding something of the world. But typically a cartographer was there to help somebody who was lost. Why would you use a map? You know, if you're already found, if you know everything, if you know you don't need a map in your own home, or depending on the state of your own home, but like most people, they don't need a map. It's either tidy enough or not big enough, but you don't need a map for your own home. But when you go into uncharted territory, that's where you need a map, which is a delineation of space and coordinates and ratios in order to see how far and the distance you need to travel, that's been placed on a piece of paper, or now maybe on like a screen, in order to help you navigate and traverse that particular new space that you're not acquainted with. So that's really interesting. One of the things that they would say also is it combines science, aesthetics, and technique. That's what a traditional map maker would use. Science, aesthetics, and technique, which are all completely significant to our discourse today, inshallah. We mentioned on Monday the significance of understanding this discipline as a science, in that it's falsifiable. Meaning what we're engaging in now is a method, a way of how to engage in something, how to apprehend something that's falsifiable, meaning it's tried and tested. Now, why is this important? Because we need to know something about the end goal. And this is important because what one can often find is Islam is often reduced to almost like an ethnicity. Like, my dad's Muslim, I'm half Muslim, my dad's Muslim, my mum's Christian, so I'm kind of half Muslim. It doesn't work like that. It's like saying Islam is not an ethnicity. Someone may have a heritage whereby they come from an archetypically Muslim land. You know, if they're from like Morocco, or they're from Algeria, or they're from Indonesia, for example. These are places which typically are almost, well, a huge percentage of Muslim population. But Islam, in its essence, it has to be active. It has to be, you know, someone described it once, it's almost like, you know, on a push bike. when you're starting to learn a bike, or anyone that has young children, that you have to keep pedaling. And when you stop, you can't move. It loses its balance and it becomes something else. Islam is very much like this. So even linguistically embedded and locked within the actual word Islam, in the Arabic morphology, which is the science of how words are unpacked and related to one another, you have this concept of a process, a method, a living method, that if you disengage with it, it somehow dies and becomes dormant. Now what this path, or this science, or this art, or this discipline that the Prophet ﷺ gave to us is about, is recognizing that and seeing where you're at. Am I inactive? Have I been dormant? You know. And in order to understand this, we need to have a map. We need to have some kind of coordinates. Now, firstly, what instruments do we have to understand what's real? In a Cartesian kind of modern context, because a pre-modern peoples would have viewed the world very differently. One example is a medieval European map, that they had this concept of a zero. It's like a naught and a T. And then you've got Europe, Asia, and Libya, which was Africa. And then you have this, the large, I think, the Atlantic, and then the T represented the Mediterranean. And that was their worldview. And then other people, they would view the world in a different way. And then it became so far out, any kind of geographical reference was purely coincidental. It was really to kind of, you know, emphasize one's place in the world, that we're on top. We're going to place ourselves on top. We're going to view our world through this particular prism. Now, then you have, in the Renaissance, things started to pick up a bit. It was actually the Muslims that, even in a kind of, not in a figurative sense, but in classical cartology, they really kind of picked things up again and did things a lot more neater and a lot more accurate. But what's interesting also is the Muslims, what preceded them was this deep knowledge of a very different type of map. A map within you. A map that unpacks something of that which the Prophet ﷺ taught us. In the Cartesian kind of, you know, when in the Enlightenment period, when those early scientists kind of looked to the world, one of the common perceptions was to view it as a machine. It's kind of just like a complex biological machine, but it runs on the same principles. Now, one of the problems with that is it's been literally truncated, it's been severed from the majority of what's actually really going on, at least in accordance to the Islamic worldview. So you're looking purely at that which can be tested for empirically. You're looking solely about that which you can see and test for in a, you know, either through maths or physics or physical biology. So what you have is a reductionist approach, meaning when you look to the world, literally that what you see is what you get. You know? And if you can't see it, really it doesn't exist. Seeing is believing. And if we understand seeing as an extension or a generalization of something which we can all apprehend from something of our senses, our five senses. So the Islamic worldview is very different. First and foremost is the default understanding that we were created. And one of the ways to view this is, imagine you're on a train and you're going and you wake up and you can't remember going on the train. And you look around you and there's things going past, and you know, you're traveling, you're in motion. Things aren't going past you, you're the one in motion. At least that's the way it's interesting, the power of perception. You feel like you're moving. And then you wake up and there are all these other people around you. And you don't quite know what they're doing. But some of them seem to be having a reasonable time. Some of them seem to kind of at least give off the impression they know what they're doing. But in reality, everyone's almost too afraid or socially insecure to ask the question, what's going on here? And not only what's going on here, but like, where do we come from? And where are we heading to? So you get caught up in the party and the free drinks and whatever else it might be, and you forget the actual purpose of the train ride. Train journeys are amazing things. I heard you have like a really interesting train journey to the north of Sweden. Yeah? Has anyone ever done that? We have to do that. That sounds so amazing. They have free drinks?
No.
No? Well, you have to pay by credit card as well. Yeah? Yeah. It's so crazy now. People don't use money anymore. So, but train rides are interesting. Cars are different. I feel like ancient because like I had to renew my passport just in the past year or so because the last time I drove was like 10 years prior. And when I went on the streets, like at least in the UK, London has always been a nightmare, you know, road-wise, and maybe some other ways as well. But Manchester, I thought it was a bit more easygoing. But now you're on the streets of Manchester, if you don't look around, you're being viewed from every angle. You're being surveilled. And, you know, you feel like in prison, like, can I actually even do anything? You know, it might be easier just this why they, you know, they've got the old Tesla kind of, you know, self-driving cars. It'd be a whole lot easier on the blood pressure at least, because like, maybe I'm sounding like so out of touch, which, you know, I've just come from the desert, so maybe there is some reality to that. But it feels so intense. And the intensity of the situation strips from a presence. Like, imagine you're on a camel. Yeah? You do that? Imagine you're on a camel. A camel is a very slow ride. Even a horse. It's a very, and I'm not saying that we should go start like pulling up on a horse outside the Rawda in Gothenburg. That might be quite interesting, but like, you get the point. Like, life is very rushed, very rapid. And what it gets you in this state, this psyche, whereby you're unable to actually get where you're going. So people go to work and it's like autopilot. Like you have an auto, like, you know, obviously gear sticks. Kim's car still has a gear stick. But you know how like an auto car, okay, that's just the gears. But the whole process, where am I going? And then what takes place through that is days slip by, and weeks slip by, and months, and years, and maybe even an entire lifetime. And it's just an amazing extended metaphor, like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Where am I going? Where am I heading? Where have I come to? You know, and the process, unfortunately, in the modern world, people talk about the West. It's in the East, West, North, and South. Only a few, you have to escape to the desert if you want to get a touch of something, of what it's not like, or to live in a more ancient kind of society. And I'm not against, you know, development, and who would be against that? But for a purpose. And when we lose the purpose, that's when the problems start to come in. Now, Muslims, they were really interested in mapping and codifying that which the Prophet ﷺ gave to us, because it's an extensive tradition. And some things are purposely, they're in no way obtruse, but they're kind of left not to know. And there's a certain mysticism within that. There's something very mystical about being told, like, this exists, but there are certain things you don't have the capacity to understand what it means. And that's part of Islam. That's part of just submitting. Well, I have to know everything. I mean, it's me. Can I not know anything? Here's a wake-up call. No. You know, that's just the reality of things. So you have certain internal faculties. On a superficial level, it's the five senses. This is what we've been given to know, to apprehend. You know. When was the last time we actually really considered and started to contemplate that? My eyes, they're like the reciprocal for sight, but that was to know God. That's the reason why we have eyesight in the Islamic worldview. Obviously practical things like walking down the street and not bumping into people, but I'm talking about the ultimate purpose, because Allah could have designed it in a whole host of different ways. But there's a reason and there's a purpose and there's a wisdom why you have eyes. And in the Islamic worldview, ultimately it's to know God, to reflect on the science, to contemplate, to ponder, to be people of ulul albab, people of foremost reasoning and contemplation, to be people of meaning. Same with your ears, it's the reciprocal for hearing. And this is an amazing connection, it's so deep, even on a purely biological level. Because you're all listening to me, but you're not actively, rearranging things in your brain. It's just taking it and you're taking meanings from it. Imam al-Haddad, one of the great masters of this tradition, he said that the eyes and the ears in particular, hearing and seeing. The reason why I stopped myself there in the Quran, hearing always precedes seeing. Inna as-sam'a wal basar. You always hear the hearing and then the seeing. Why? Because with hearing there's peripheral vision. You can hear everything and you can't really block it. But with your eyes it's monodirectional and you can block it because you have eyelids. That's why Allah says, say to the believers to lower their gaze. And that obviously means in terms of an appropriate interaction with and behavior amongst peoples. But what it also means is to lower one's gaze from those things which will distract you, which is one of the meanings, which we'll get into it, of the dunya, anything which ultimately distracts you from your ultimate purpose. It could be even the position of the imam in a masjid. Doesn't mean a flashy car, and if it distracts you from Allah, it's considered dunya. It's lowly, and it's something which is a hubut, it's falling from that high place. So you have the senses. But what we want to talk about a bit deeper, and each of these components we're hopefully going to go through in an individual session dedicated to this, is the level beyond the physical. The first thing we're going to talk about is the aql. Now, aql in the Arabic language is that which you tie to something, and you could probably best translate it in the most simple and unconvoluted way as the mind. But already we have something of a kind of an obstacle here, because whether we know it or not, and part of these sessions is getting to know a bit more about ourselves, and that we are preconditioned. Like every single one of us here is filtering through a preconditioned filtration system. And what Islam ultimately empowers a person to do is to allow complete freedom, complete objectivity, that you're no longer just constrained to, well, this is my, nature and nurture context. This is where I'm at. Islam is saying no, through the power of wahi, of divine communication, of revelation, of these realities and acquainting oneself with those things in the heart, in the mind, in the soul, having these things activated, your experience of life will be completely different. Not just when you're in the prayer, you get more of a vibe. A lot of people think like, yeah, I did a spirituality course because I want to concentrate in my prayer. That's an amazing intention, to be a bit more focused and attentive in the prayer. But what's on offer? One time, Sayyidina Haritha, one of the Sahaba, a young man, he was about 17 years old. He was in the masjid and he was asleep. And the Prophet, he said, you got to understand, these things can't be overlooked. He kind of like nudged him with his foot. Like he could have just tapped him and said, there are many ways of doing things, but everything he did was teaching. And there's something very endearing about that. Like you're not going to do that to some random person. You're going to do that to your son, or you're going to do that to someone that you know, and they're going to feel comfortable. There's like an intimacy in that. There's a familiarity to that. So he nudges him with his foot, and Sayyidina Haritha wakes up. Ya Rasulullah. And he looks at him and he says, Kayfa asbahti ya Haritha? Which in Arabic means like, it kind of means like, how are you doing, Haritha? How's things? But literally, Kayfa asbahta means, how did you come into the morning? How have you woken up? So it's amazing, the Arabic language has this capacity to carry a multitude of layers. It's like, how are you doing? But it's also like, what's the state of your being whilst entering into this morning? It's so profound. That's why it's such a spiritual language. Has the capacity to contain so many meanings. And he says, radiyallahu anhu, asbahtu mu'minan haqqa ya Rasulullah. Which is a big thing to say. My state is I'm a true believer, ya Rasulullah. Haqq, like I'm an authentic, my state of iman is in complete experiential, is the pinnacle of experiential, potential, ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet ﷺ smiles and he says, every claim has a proof. Like you're going to be coming out with whoppers like that, you're going to have to substantiate it with something. You can't just go around saying that kind of thing. Like one of the worst things in spirituality that the Prophet ﷺ taught is to make a false claim. Like, yeah, I'm really actually one of the most spiritual people here, but nobody knows. Just keep it on the deal. You've lost it all. Like, because you're seeing yourself. And the whole point of this, as we said, was to see Allah, to experience Allah. And you can't work in tandem with Allah. It doesn't work like that. So he says, substantiate your claim. He's giving tarbiyah there. Like, you can't make a claim like that. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, I look and it's as if I can witness, I can see Jannah, paradise, and the people of paradise experiencing the bliss of paradise in the garden. And I look to the other side and it's as if I can see the people of Jahannam and the state that they're in. And gold and soil, clay, earth, is of the same value to me. And I look to the sky, it's as if I can see the arsh, the great creation of Allah, which we're not able to see within the known universe. I can see it barizan, like manifest before me. Anyone ever woken up like that? Before you have your morning fika? It's like, where are you going to be at? You have fika in the morning? More of an afternoon thing. It's coffee all the time here in Sweden. I'm loving it, But anyway, even after a coffee, I've never experienced that. So he's got the Arsh of Ar-Rahman. That's how Haritha woke up. And the Prophet smiled. And what did he say? He said, Arafta felzam. And he repeated it 3 times. Literally like, Arafta, like you've got it. Felzam. So stick fast. Hold on to what you're doing. This is what I'm here to teach. This is what's real. Like you've got it. Yes. This is a substantiation of that claim. Arafta felzam. And he uses the word arafta. You've known. And this is what we're going to go on to first, inshallah. How do you know? Once again, it's one of the first things that we talk about in terms of this juxtaposition between that which we've been conditioned within a contemporary mindset. You know through your intellect, through your mind. Partially. The aql, let's read what Imam al-Ghazali says. So it's got many meanings. He mentions about this in the beginning, in one of the chapters in the Ihya al-Ulumuddin. It's got many meanings, 2 of which we shall narrate here. So that's another thing as well. In any discipline, you'll have a multitude of interpretations or definitions for one particular word. And this is why this session is so significant, because it's the predicate to everything else which comes. So we're going to reference the heart, we're going to reference the mind, we're going to reference the soul. We need to have an orientation to what it is we're actually talking about. Because these words are used flippantly. And to a master of this tradition, it seems funny. Like, I've got a good heart, and how can you even say that? You'd never find someone saying those kind of things. Not that they're kind of self-deprecating to the extent that despairing, but those kind of statements they're claims. So he says the first meaning of aql is intellect. And you could say like pure unadulterated intellect. Like it's not influenced by necessarily like motivation or passion or these kind of things which come from a different place in our human makeup. It's pure intellect. So one of the ways to understand this is the malaika, the angelic realm. They're pure aql. They don't feel like human beings. Like we said, feeling isn't from the intellect. With which the true nature of things of this material world is known, and its seat is the soul. And we'll get onto this, inshallah. But basically, this is the first kind of stage within to like the ghaib, the unseen. And why is it important that we have a belief in the unseen? The opening ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. It's a guidance for the people of taqwa, of consciousness. What's the first attribute of the people of this taqwa, of this consciousness of Allah? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Those that have a belief in the unseen. And it doesn't mean that we were talking about this like a kind of random faith. Yeah, it kind of maybe exists. Maybe goblins exist. Maybe fairies do. Maybe trolls do. It doesn't mean like that. Iman is a reality in the heart, and we can go on to this when we talk about the heart more extensively. It's a certitude. It's a reality which is apprehended. So this is where effectively the five senses go back to, the aql. This is where you're able to understand, okay, I can see this, therefore, 1, 2, and 3. But the therefore part is from the aql, is from the mind. The scholars have a difference of opinion, even whether it was centered in the brain or not, this particular spiritual faculty. I'm pointing to my head, not by consensus amongst the scholars. The second meaning of aql is the power or the capacity to comprehend the secrets. And when they talk about secrets, you'll hear this a lot. It's typically a translation of sir, which does mean secret, but it's not like one of those kind of secrets. You get that? Everyone paying attention? It's not like, oh God, I know what's going on. It doesn't mean like that. It means something that's not manifest, something that's not obvious, something that maybe you need to get to through the power of illusion, not illusion, allusion, through poetry or something like this to apprehend, because it's very difficult to understand. The aql can help with this. It's a subtle essence, and Imam al-Ghazali often talks about this nature, particularly if he's talking about this component of the unseen, is it's subtle, latif, called knowledge, which is an attribute, which is the thing which contains. So in one of the hadith, the first thing to be created was the aql. And it has this potentiality to be disobedient also. Because typically, or frequently, when we see things purely intellectually, it's not always rational. There's a big difference. People say, I'm a rational type of person. I'm agnostic, I'm atheist because I think rationally. If you actually think about it in terms of what we mean by rationality, it's not necessarily the most rational thing. It's kind of a claim or an assumption. The aql. Why is that important? Because through the aql we understand principles, we understand the coordinates. And a sound aql is that which is able to recognize good and bad. That's one of the definitions of it. So the Prophet ﷺ, if anybody was mentioned to him, tell me about such and such, he would ask about their aql. Okay, now we're going to go on to the heart. Al-Qalb. So once again, it has two meanings Imam al-Ghazali talks about. The first meaning is like it's a medieval, at least according to Imam al-Ghazali, definition, medical definition. And the long and short of it is he says, like, that's not what we're talking about here. So he says it's a piece of flesh in the left breast called heart, which is hollow in the interior, which is filled up with blood, and which is again the source of the ruh or life. Heart is the center for circulation of the blood. So a very kind of uninspiring medical, biological definition of what the heart is. And he's saying linguistically, this is what we mean when we say heart, qalb. And this is to do with the science of anatomy. Obviously, that's what they recorded in his time. He says, we shall not refer to it in our book. This is not what we're talking about. So once again, Imam al-Ghazali was a scientist. He's going to tell you what, don't think we're talking about this because it's not that. Okay? The second meaning of qalb is what we're concerned with here. It's an immaterial thing, and that's the first thing to understand. It's immaterial, so you can't test for it in the same way that you would test for something in the material world. So this is where Islam never had this issue with science. You know, and it's kind of unfortunate you get Muslims kind of swept, certain Muslims swept along with the tides of just kind of, you know, postmodern rhetoric. As in like, we never have an issue with science. Define to me what science is. Don't have an issue with it. Some of those pioneering people in science were Muslims. But the idea is, and there's a difference, I don't know what you call it in Swedish, but in English it's typically called scientism. Scientism, which is effectively a worldview that only the methodologies within the realms of science allow you to apprehend truth and reality. That's it. And if you can't test for it in that way, it does not exist. That is what the Muslim disagrees with. Because we're saying, like, you're taking a truncated, tiny view of reality and saying, that's how I access my entire existence. We say no. So back to the analogy, if we go back to the train, a person who has intellect uses their aql, they're going to say, okay, I came from somewhere and I'm going to somewhere. But the aql, al-mujarrad, the pure intellect, is not going to be able to understand, you know, where it came from. It can understand I came from somewhere and I'm going to somewhere, but the intellect alone can't say where. Another example that was given, imagine you have somebody knock on the door. Kim's late for class. We need him to turn on the camera. He knocks on the door. If no one's ever met Kim before, or whoever else it may be, Kim's easy, we can pick on him because he's right in front of him, you know how to take it. If someone knocks on the door, the mind can understand, can apprehend, there is somebody or something knocking on the door, meaning the sound of, yeah, there's someone at the door. But who it is, are they old, are they young, are they, you know, male, female? What's their intention for knocking on the door? The mind can't understand that. And it doesn't mean, it's a really important point, people are like, well, you're insulting my intelligence. Your intelligence was not designed to know that. There's no insult here. Like the analogy of taking I'm so behind of like, what's the latest computer game? I've been told off for using like really ancient analogies. Huh?
Super Mario Bros.
No, that's what I would have said. The SNES. Yeah.
Fortnite.
Huh?
Fortnite.
Astaghfirullah, Kim. How do you know that?
I work at school.
You work in a school. We'll let you off. So it's like, so is it stuff? I'm going to embarrass me. We can edit this later. It's like a cartridge, or what is it? How do you put it?
It's a phone.
CDs are over here.
It's a phone.
You just download it.
Yeah.
Let me go easy on me. I live in the desert.
We'll tell you about it later.
Yeah? No, don't. Astaghfirullah. That's why I live in the desert.
You download it.
You download it. Okay, tamam. Go back to like, you know, the mid-90s. Yeah, SNES was about mid-90s. And tell people about that. And they're like, what? So if you show people the phone and you give them a phone and they're trying to put like a SNES. You know what a SNES is? It's what the cool guys say for Super Nintendo. Yeah, you put it in the phone. Huh? And everyone's going to be like, what are you doing? Now that's a bad example because that is an old thing. It's mustahalak, it's, you know, perished. But it was never designed to go in there. It wasn't meant to recognize that. Another example, you have like a barometer, which is a way of testing, apprehending the weather conditions. And you're using it as a thermometer. So you're like, okay, so like, it's not going to work in that way. There's nothing wrong with the barometer here. Well, let's think of another analogy. I'm going to make you guys work. It's late for me too. Huh? Come on, Kim, Mr. Fortnite. No, that's your piece for the evening. Okay? You get the point? It wasn't meant for that. So the mind, people are like, no, but I can figure out. One day, science will allow us to figure out who's better. That's not what you're going down the wrong path. And what Islam says is that there are other components to you that make you who you are. Now the problem is, if you condense it down, that all you are is biological mass with a mind. There are going to be things happening to your heart, to your soul, to your sir, which is the innermost component of who you are. And you're going to be saying like, I don't understand it. This is my mind. Let me, you know. And you're going to treat your mind, and maybe it's not even the mind that needs treating. SubhanAllah, so important. So important. You know, on this point, I don't want to go on about it too much because you have to deal with it very delicately. But if you look at the history of psychiatry, what they initially called psychoanalysis, it's really interesting because it comes from a very secular perspective. The idea that it's the observing of, or the analysis of mental health and understanding behaviors through this. Now, we could say that there may be something useful in that, but once again, it's a very truncated view of the entire project. You know? And I'm not saying it's pro or against. I'm not going to go down that at all. But if you're talking in terms of like psychiatry, you've got psychology, and you've got like a psychiatrist who can prescribe mind-affecting medicines, you know. And in an Islamic worldview, there may be things that you may be altering and influencing that it's not the full picture. Can you imagine? You know, it's like a half diagnosis. You know, it's really serious, subhanAllah. So the qalb, what time are we on?
15 minutes left.
Okay. So the qalb, or the heart, is this immaterial thing. It's not from the material world. It's inherently mystical, you know, meaning you can't comprehend its entire reality. But there are certain things which the Prophet ﷺ informed us about. Latifa, it's this subtle reality that has a connection to the material heart. How mystical is that? It's so amazing. You know. That's also indicative of something much deeper, the way that we are temporal beings. We are now, at some level, inhabiting a particular time. We're existing in a time. But there are things going on within our inner realities which are connected to eternity or have eternal implications. Like what I just said there will have an impact to my internal reality. Everything that we're doing now, whether you're doing something physically or there are things going in your heart or in your mind or in your soul, it has an impact for eternity. SubhanAllah. So this is mudrika. It's able to literally catch or capture certain spiritual knowledges of the is able to apprehend, maybe you could say, certain things of the spiritual world. And almost every culture worldwide had some kind of intuition to this, to any greater or lesser extent. Potentially the athars, or the remnants of prophecy in those lands, or just having more of an acquaintance with fitra, being in a default human state, allows you to understand that the heart understands certain things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. They have hearts, they're not able to comprehend with them. So how can a heart comprehend? And there's some very interesting contemporary medical studies now about certain neurons within the heart. So even in a biological level, there's far much more going on that we really fully understand. However, just to reiterate, what we're talking about here is not that which can be tested for empirically. So we're going to go over that in more depth, and in forthcoming weeks we're going to be talking firstly about the aql and how to refine the aql, your mind. So there's a process, there's a methodology for what they call ma'rifat al-khawatir. A khatir, you could say it's like a random thought. And the Prophet ﷺ taught us a method how to capture that, which most of us don't do. You know, I just think I should do this. But you're not able to understand its root. Where did that come from? What's the source? What's the agenda? What's the root of that thought? But what this science does is it allows you to think, where did that thought come from? And it allows you to decompartmentalize it into one of 4 different categories, and then deal with it, you know, in a way which is appropriate and healthy and conducive. Similarly with the heart, in the next few weeks we're going to be going into the nature of the heart and how why it should be cultivated and refined. So this is something that sometimes gets people, like, you know, when they hear things like purification of the heart. There are many talks and things. Why do I need to purify my heart? Is it that bad? Is it that? It's not necessarily a bad or good type thing, but to know that there is a process involved which involves a detox and a cleansing and a cultivation and a refinement. Why? This is the thing, like, purify your heart. It's really tough. It's really difficult. Why? Most of us miss this. Why? Because the heart can act as a mirror. And this is ultimately what it gets on to become. Now you have the ruh. And this in some ways is one of the second to most mystical of the human being, of the human components, the ruh. Simply put, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they ask you about the ruh, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. They ask you about the ruh, about the soul. Say that the soul is from the affair of my Lord, and you've not been given knowledge, إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, except a small amount. So what is the soul? Sometimes, also just to make things slightly even more complicated, the soul, the heart, the nafs can be synonyms. They can mean the same thing. Like someone they've got a very pure nafs. They've got a very pure soul. They've got a very pure heart. It can mean the same thing. And this is why it's also important to have those definitions. Now we're talking about the specific reality of what it means. One of the most beautiful things personally that really resonated was what Imam al-Qushayri mentioned. He's one of the great masters of this tradition. Is he described, because there's in the injunction there in the Quran, it's almost like saying, like, don't try and guess. It's not about guesswork. This knowledge has been sealed. Like, you are not to know about it for certain wisdoms and certain, you know, maybe protections or maybe, you know, other things going on here. So it's not to overly define things, but it's to approximate so we can orientate and also understand the map, how to deal with ourselves, how to understand that we're moving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he would talk about you have the heart and the ruh, the soul, batin al-qalb. It's the inner aspect or the innermost domain of the heart. Imam Umar al-Mahdar, who's the son of a Yemeni scholar and master called Imam al-Saggath, Imam Abdurrahman al-Saggath, he would say, لِكُلِّ فُؤَاد أَلَفْوَاد. in every heart, fu'ad is another name for the heart, there are 1,000 valleys. In every heart there are 1,000 valleys. Now there's a principle when you, in the Arabic language, that when you mention numbers, unless it's been quantified or specified by, no, we actually mean a specific number, is it just means a huge amount. Like you're not 1,000, like 999. Now we've counted all of the valleys of the heart. It doesn't mean like that. What it means is like you've got 1,000 valleys and you've got this entire cosmos going on inside of you you're not even aware of, but it's affecting the way you think, and it's affecting what you do, and it's affecting the way you are with your kids, and it's affecting the way you are with your workmates, and it's affecting the way you drive, and it's affecting your ambitions. Not important, crucially important. This is what the Prophet ﷺ came to give us. How to be aware of yourself and move to that which is meaningful and purposeful, not just to meander through life. And this is part of his sunnah, part of his shama'il ﷺ, that when he would walk purposefully. And there's a beautiful hadith, they often mention it in the khutbahs, when they say, he was never seen, and it's really interesting because typically it's like, what does that even mean? He was never seen except coming or going. It sounds like a strange thing to say. Like, what else are you going to be doing? But if you look at most of us, we're kind of just like meandering. Just like, what are you doing? Just hanging out. He was never seen except coming or going, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning he was always on a mission. He was always serving people. He was always helping people. He was always going somewhere. You know, like the hadith, the dua when you go to the masjid. Allahumma inni as'aluka bihaqqi sa'ilina alayk wa bihaqqi raghibina ilayk. Oh Allah, I ask you by the rank, the greatness, the status, you know, of those that ask of you, those that beseech you, those that call upon you. You know, and by the haqq, the right, the greatness, the worth of the people, raghibin, those people that are devoted to you, those people that are desirous, they want to be close to you. They yearn for your closeness. I ask you through them. This is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَبِحَقِّ مَمْشَايَ هَذَا إِلَيْكَ. So incredible. And by the right or the greatness of this walking of mine, me walking right now, I'm asking you by the right of what's going on right now. Not to the masjid, to you. إِلَيْكَ. And by the right of this walking of mine to you. And that was his state in every instant. كَانَ يَذْكُرَ اللَّهَ فِي كُلِّ أَحْيَانِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. He was always in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always. And they say that's the hallmark of wilayah. Like if you want to see a person of Allah, they're always in a state of remembrance. Because if you love someone, you can't. مَنْ أَحَبَّ شَيْءٍ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ ذِكْرِهِ. If you love something, you're always talking about it. And to kind of talk about anything else, it's kind of like it's too heavy. Yeah, just doing it to appease. You know. But if you love someone or something or anything, just the capacity to love. Now what about if you love Allah? These people, their hearts, they only love Allah because Allah loves them and He's brought them in. أَخْتَارَهُمْ لِنَفْسِهِ. He's chosen them for His own self. Like Allah says to Sayyidina Musa, I've chosen you for me. What can you say about that kind of human being? You know. And that's the thing, there are some people, they're just majdoob. People, they hear this term and it's kind of like, oh, that means like kind of like a goofy type, kind of like just a bit. It's like an excuse for the nafs to be a bit kind of wild and crazy and the light of the party. You get these people, no, you're not. You know what I mean? That's not a majdoob. A majdoob is a specific technical term within this science. From the word jadab. It's literally somebody whose heart has been pulled by Allah. Like flooded with light. You know. And they talk about this, not the dichotomy, but the relationship between the majdoob and the salik. The salik is the wayfarer. Like what we're engaging now is ilm as-suluk. The science of how to tread. How to walk, how to flow, to know where you're going, to know what's going on inside you, to understand an obstacle when it's an obstacle, to understand a platform when it's a platform, and to ascend, and to aspire, and to fly. That's saluk, but that's a science. But there's some people are just rings. But they say there's no salik. You with me with the technical? There's no one who's traveling on the path, except in reality, they're also majdoob. Like every single one of us now, like show gratitude to Allah, because we're only engaging in this now because Allah has brought us here. Because Allah has grabbed you and said, you'll come to me. And the people that were the most entrenched and invested in this authority of conveying these meanings, they would say, Allah never starts someone on the path to Him other than He wants that person to reach Him. Allah doesn't waste people's time. Allah hasn't gathered us together on a Wednesday evening. We could be doing a whole host of other things just because there's nothing much to do. Allah's got more to do with His creation. Allah, la yuhib safasif al-umur. Allah doesn't like trivial, petty, meaningless things. I created you to know me. And Allah is opening up this path to know Him. He's saying, like, wait a minute, you ain't just some biological organism. As amazing as you may think, يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. They know the zahir, that which manifests, the apparent, that which you can test for. Wow, look at the intricacy of the veins and the lungs, and it is amazing. But that's just min al hayat dunya. That's not even all of the outward stuff. That's not even everything that can be tested for. وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ. And they, in regards to the akhirah, what's to come. And by implication, everything else which is deeper. Everything which is ghaibi, which is unseen. These endless worlds and domains and realities within existence. Hum ghafilun. They're completely heedless. Completely heedless. You know what the opposite of ghafla is in the Arabic language? It's so profound. Ghafla means heedlessness. Which maybe in English you'd say something, well, the opposite is like piety. Because it has kind of a religion. But ghafla, not to be in tune with yourself and Allah. What's the opposite of that? Yaqala, you're awake. You have people saying like, this guy's like woke. Yeah? No? Kim?
Yep.
Yeah?
That's the thing.
That's the thing. See? Contemporary references. What does it mean? That you have a degree of consciousness. That you're not just some kind of like, yeah, I'm going to go with the flow just to sell some music. That's what it means in a contemporary like music context. He's going to sell some records and just like to get to the charts. What it means is this guy is a bit more conscious. He's socially aware. He's like a bit of an activist. That's what it means. He's woke. But the true woke person is this person whose heart is awake and experiencing and he's navigating. He's, subhanAllah. So we're going to end by just reflecting. We're going to go deeper into the nafs. There's going to be a whole section on the nafs. So we're going to have to look in the mirror. It's not always the most pleasant of things to do. But to know that these things are there to, so we're to be rectified and to be clarified and cleansed. The nafs has different degrees which we can talk about. We're also going to talk about something called hawa, which is the fuel of the nafs. It's the fuel, it's the impetus that fuels the nafs. We're going to talk about what that is and how to recognize it. Because if you can nip these things in the bud, can you imagine the potential? Like instead of just like, I'm just angry today. Why? Where did it come from? What's the source? How do I uproot that? How do I take it by the neck and change it around? Imagine what kind of person we could be. They say the heart is the place of ma'rifah. So it's arafta falzam. So stick to it. The heart is the domain, the location which apprehends ma'rifah. They often talk about gnosis. This may have some interesting connotations. But it's from the Quranic ayah, وَمَا خَلَقْتَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. And I've not created the jinn or the humankind إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, except for devotion, except for pure worship. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he said, one of the great mufassirin, interpreters of the Quran amongst the Sahaba that the Prophet ﷺ made dua for, he said, أَيْ لِيَعْرِفُونَ. The meaning of this is to know. Because what's the purpose of worship? It's not just banging your head on the floor and assuming some kind of physical posture, and that's what Allah wants for the higher purpose of His creation. It's to know Him. Is that through this engagement, through this prophetic methodology, veils start to get lifted in the heart and you start to experience something of those divine realities. Worship Allah as He deserves to be worshipped. Jalla Jalal. So the heart is the place of ma'rifah, of this knowing, to know Allah, to feel His closeness, to taste something of that intimacy. The ruh, or the soul, is the place of mahabba. So in contemporary culture, I mean, like, when you talk about love, it's like lodged in the nafs. That, in our tradition, is not love. That's not love. And one of the saddest things for the lovers, for the people of Allah, they see people and they're just like, you don't know what love is. You don't know what love is. You think that's love? You can write a nice song, like, you know, under candlelight. That's not love. Love is far more profound. Love is what caused Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu to weep every night for 2.5 years after his Habib, his beloved, passed away, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And his wird, his dhikr, was wa shawqa ila rasulillah. He was just missing the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Who gave him that state? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sayyidina Umar, when he heard that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had passed on, couldn't take it. Initially he couldn't take it. That's love. Sahaba, yuhibbuna man hajara ilayhim. They love those that migrate towards them. They were lovers. Ala hubbihi miskinan. Wa yut'imuna at-ta'ama. Out of love. It's out of love. Not out of just moral obligation. It's out of love. That was the driving force. They were lovers because they were connected to the greatest lover. Sayyidah Aisha, she said years after the Prophet returned to the Rafiq al-A'la, he said, tell us what was the most ajib, amazing thing about the Prophet. What did he do? She said, everything he did was amazing. Everything he did was amazing. But if I'm going to single out one thing, that when everyone else went to their lovers, to the people they love at night, he went to his, meaning he stood the night in prayer. And he used to ask, like Aisha, like, do you permit me, like, just to spend the night with Allah? Like, it's giving people their haqq and their rights, but like, his heart was always with Allah. When he was asked, on his, in Sakarat al-Maut, he whispered, and then Sayyidah Aisha, she said, what did he say? He said, he said that he was given a choice, a decision, to stay amongst us or to go back to Rafiq al-A'la, to go back to Allah. And she said, إِذَنْ لَا يَخْتَارَنَا أَبَدًا. Wallahi, لَن يَخْتَارَنَا أَبَدًا. He goes, well, then he's never going to choose us. Like, she knew her husband. She knew where he was, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. She said, he's with Allah, khalas. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli wa sallam alayhi wa alayhi. So that's the ruh. So you need to have soul if you're going to love. It's not the place of the nafs. Love is, inshallah, we're dedicating a specific session to this. And then you have the batin of the ruh, the innermost domain or dimension of the soul. This is like what makes you human. This is the core of your being. And they call it the sir. يعلم السر وأخفى. He knows the sir and even deeper. And that's to do with an alam, a world or a domain which we're not even aware of. And Allah knows within you. One of the books by one of the great masters of this tradition, Sayyidina Sheikh Abu Bakr bin Salim, he wrote a text called Miftah as-Sarair, the key to opening up this space. And he wrote this when he was 17 years old. Radiallahu anhu. And this is the place of mushahada, where you witness Allah. And ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah, to worship Allah as if you see Him. So a person whose sir is purified, the innermost being, their prayer is something else. Wallahu alam. So I wanted to end by just offering something that maybe we could reflect on. The ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَرَاهُمْ يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَيْكَ وَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. And you see them, meaning, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, you see them, tarahum. Who are they? The disbelievers amongst the Quraysh. يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَيْكَ. You see them look to you. وَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. And they don't see. Once again, a very mystical ayah also. Now, there are different tafasir, different explanations of this. One of them, it's actually talking, they say it's actually talking about the asnam, or the idols. You see them looking to you, the idols, but they're lifeless. They're not only not gods, they're not even living. You know, but one of the meanings to this also is to do with this inability to perceive that which can be beyond touch and sight and smell and hearing. So you don't believe in it. Because there were those that frequented the company of the Prophet ﷺ, and they didn't see. He was amongst them. And his reality, he was Rasulullah ﷺ, Habib Allah ﷺ. That was his reality. But they didn't perceive it. Why? Because they were veiled by what they call bashariyat. He has a nose like me. He has a mouth like me. He eats like me. Mali hadha Rasul. What's with this Prophet? Yamshi fil aswaq. He just walks in the marketplace. Like me. وَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. And they don't see. So they were veiled through these bashariyat from the khasa'is or khususiyat. These special gifts. He was Rasulullah. What was going on in his heart, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The most purest and cultivated and refined heart. A heart that was chosen to be the pinnacle and perfection, you know, and the qibla for every other heart to orientate towards too. What was the reality of that ruh that Ibn al-Qayyim says is more expansive than the entire cosmos? His soul, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Azizun alayhi ma anittum. It's heavy upon him that which has befallen you. How is that? Because his soul was so vast. And he takes care of everyone, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Bil-mu'minina ra'uf ar-rahim, gentle and merciful to the believers. What was the reality of his sir? The innermost essence of the most dearest one to ever be designed and fashioned and created by the divine hand. And connection to him is the way through the map and the way to understand it, to have those things unlocked. Because the nature of this map, just as we reference, that they have 3D maps now. This is a map which is not purely linear. It's a map which involves countless other dimensions which can't only be understood here. And this is why so much of this science is just do this. Wake up in the night for 2 rak'ahs and see what happens to your soul. Give, selflessly when nobody sees you. When there's someone in your home and you could just shout at them and no one's going to say anything. But you stop and you refrain for the sake of Allah. Those are things that mean something to Allah. And that's da'wah, that's calling people. It has an effect in existence. If more of us take on these realities, when we're alone, we're in khalwa, and you do something, it's purely for the sake of Allah, that has a ripple throughout the known cosmos and throughout all these different worlds. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow this to be an opportunity to reacquaint ourselves with ourselves to know a bit more about who we are, and to know the potential that's already there. You can go home tonight knowing that you've got all these other things connected to you. These capacities to perceive, these lenses to deepen your consciousness. And this is one of the most significant, important reasons why we connected to those people that have traversed that path, that have that refinement and purity. Because we need guides. The map on its own is not enough. So may Allah connect us to them and through them, by them and with them in every moment. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.